In our class last week, remember that the Shulammite had been walking in the garden thinking about the shepherd's proposals to her, and how that he wanted her to be the mother of his children. He respected her purity. She was his source of life. And then the Shunammite made a promise to herself, and that was she promised to embrace femininity. She wanted to be all that was involved in being a woman and being a girl. She wanted to succeed in marriage. She visualized getting married and her husband coming and being satisfied and being happy that he was married to her. And then we saw in the last part of chapter 5, verse 2, that God said, "Eat, friends, drink and imbibe deeply, O lovers." And so it is that God put his stamp of approval upon the marriage of the Shulamite to the shepherd. But the Shulamite is not yet convinced that the shepherd is the one that she should marry. She is still debating. She's in Solomon's temple, or not his temple, but in his palace. She's out walking in his garden, and she's thinking, and she's not quite convinced that really the shepherd is the one that she should marry. And I want us to turn over to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 4 through 9, and get just a little bit of an idea of why it is she's in this dilemma and why it is she's not quite convinced. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 4 through 9, this is where Solomon is talking about his wealth. So as we read through here, think about what all it is she is seeing and what all she is experiencing as she's in Solomon's palace. Solomon says, "I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself." Now, if you want to put a reference by this where I built houses for myself, you can go back and look in 1 Kings 9, verses 15 through 19, and there has a list there of all the cities that Solomon built, places where he built houses for himself, just to get an idea of the number of houses that Solomon built for himself. And that was 1 Kings 9, verses 15 through 19. So Solomon, when he said he built houses for himself, then he not only had a summer house and a winter house and a vacation house and a house for this and a house for that, a house where he kept his horses, a house where he kept his soldiers. Solomon just had innumerable houses. And then he says, "I planted vineyards for myself." So he planted special vineyards for himself. And along with that, he says, "I made gardens and parks for myself. And I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees." Now Solomon, back at this time, he imported a lot of rare and beautiful trees from other countries, brought them there and put them in his parks and in his gardens. So when you strolled through Solomon's gardens, you were seeing plants and flowers and beautiful shrubbery that you would never have seen anywhere else in the land of Palestine. So he was just creating a very fabulous world for himself. And then he says, "I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees." So we all know how beautiful water is to look at. So he had ponds that were not only beautiful to look at, but they were to irrigate the trees that he also had growing, these forests that he had growing. So Solomon really knew a lot about this, and this was something that he paid a lot of attention to. And Solomon said, "I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves." So Solomon, he just had tremendous numbers of servants. He bought servants for himself, and he had servants that were born in his household. Anybody, any job that he needed to be done, Solomon had someone that he could get to do that job for him. So he just had slaves running over. "Also I possessed flocks and herds, larger than all who preceded me in Jerusalem." So again, just telling us about the wealth of Solomon. Then in verse 8, "Also I collected for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and provinces." We talked earlier about how that silver was just like gravel to Solomon, because it was so plentiful that all of his eating and drinking vessels were made out of gold because silver was too common. So Solomon was continually flaunting his wealth. And when he says that he has the treasures of kings and provinces, you know, the Queen of Sheba came to hear Solomon's wisdom. And kings and queens were always coming to hear Solomon's wisdom. And they were always bringing him the best of their gifts that they had to give him. They were bringing him great treasures from all of the foreign lands. So Solomon just had all kinds of magnificent and beautiful things surrounding him. And then he says, "I provided for myself male and female singers, and the pleasures of men, many concubine." Now when he says he provided for himself male and female singers, you know, we think how important it is and how nice it is to have a big fancy stereo and have good music. Solomon had the real thing. He had singers there singing for him. Anytime he wanted, he had beautiful music to listen to. And then he says the pleasures of men. He didn't deny himself any of the physical pleasures. Many concubines. We've talked about that this word before refers to a slave who is taken in as a wife. So these are slave women who he is treating as wives. And then it says, then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem, and my wisdom also stood by me. So here it is, Solomon is spending all of this money on his houses and his gardens and importing different types of plants. And he's doing all of these things and has all of these slaves. You know, when we go out and we buy a new house, well, we have to sit down and figure out the budget and how much can we afford. And then after we decide to buy it, well, we have to scrimp and save and really work to make changes and to do whatever we want to with it. Solomon is saying, I did everything I wanted with my money, and I had money left over. I could have done it again and again and again. So Solomon was a tremendously wealthy individual. And here is the Shulamite in his palace. She is surrounded by the treasures of kings. All of this wealth, all of these servants, all of this gold, all of this beauty and luxury that she has never before seen in her life. And so she's impressed by this, and she's confused. Should I marry the poor shepherd boy who can offer me nothing but love? Or should I take Solomon up on his proposal? So she really has a dilemma, and she really genuinely does not know what to do. She is right in the middle of this, and her emotions are caught by it. So what we're going to see is that she comes in from walking out in the garden, and in our Bibles we're going to have a new scene. Go back to the Song of Solomon, chapter 5. And in verse 2, this is scene 4. So if you want to write up above verse 2, chapter 5, verse 2 is scene number 4. Now our curtains close on her in the garden, and as they open again, we see her in bed. And the time we saw her in bed before, she was out in the countryside in Solomon's tent. This time she is in his palace, and she is having a dream that reflects where she is. And this is a new dream, a different dream. Basically, what we're going to see is in her dream, she's going to hear the shepherd's voice, but she's going to resist. She is in the palace, surrounded by all of this wealth and luxury, and so why should she be interested in the shepherd? So she's going to resist. Then she's going to see just his hand in the dream, and seeing the sight of his hand is going to make all of her loving affection that she's had for him, is going to make all of it come flooding back. She's going to jump up and to open to the shepherd, but the shepherd is going to be gone. And so she's going to have a dilemma that she's going to have to solve her problem. So let's turn to Song of Solomon, chapter 5, verse 2, and notice her dream. And here it is, she says, I was asleep, but my heart was awake. A voice, my beloved, was knocking. So we know this is a shepherd because she always refers to the shepherd as my beloved. So my beloved was knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my perfect one. For my head is drenched with dew, and my locks with the damp of night. Now here it is, the shepherd calls her my darling. And I got two people ask me, one in the morning class and one in the evening class, both asked me, what about this expression, darling, that Solomon is always calling her his darling, and why is it bad when Solomon calls her his darling, but it's good when the shepherd calls her my darling? Now, if we think about this word, darling, this word is a lot like, as I explained earlier, like our word honey or our word dear. These are words that can be very casual and used very loosely, but yet if the right person is using these words where there is an emotional attachment to us behind that, then that word takes on different meaning. For example, if a clerk at the store says dear or honey to us as she's waiting on us, then that's something that we view as very casual and very insignificant. But if our husband calls us dear or honey, then we have a lot of emotion and a lot of feelings behind that, and that is something that pleases us and makes us feel good. The word darling in our language today is similar to this. A lot of times people will call someone else darling this and darling that, using it in a casual way, whereas if our husband calls us darling, then this is something that pleases us. The main difference between the shepherd and Solomon is that Solomon never calls her anything but my darling. That is the only expression he uses with her. He never talks about her as a person as having any kind of an emotional involvement with her. He's always talking about her beautiful body. Whereas on the other hand, the shepherd has many names for her. He calls her my sister, my bride. Now Solomon calls her my dove, and the shepherd does too. They both use that expression. And then he calls her my darling. But as we've already seen, he has an emotional investment with her. He values her love. He values the things that she says to him. Yes, she's attractive to him, but he's interested in her being the mother of his children. He values her purity. There is a more permanent and more lasting relationship with him. So the difference in the word basically is the way the two men use it. One man uses it in a casual way, and the other one uses it as a form of affection for her. Yes?
What comes to mind is Zsa Gabor. Dolly. She calls everybody Dolly.
Yeah, okay.
That's that same,
Right, okay. Okay.
Casual term.
Right, okay, good. Okay, good example. Okay, so here it is in her dream. We go back to her dream. She's hearing the shepherd saying, "Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my perfect one." He says, "For my head is drenched with dew, my locks with the damp of the night." Now, if we lived around shepherds, we would know exactly what he was talking about here when he says that my head is drenched with the dew and my locks with the damp of the night. It was the custom of the shepherds during the dry season to go out and take their sheep out to pasture at night so that their sheep could eat the grass while the dew was on the grass. And the sheep are able to get water in this way, and they're able to survive periods where there is not a lot of rainfall. So what he is saying is, he's saying, I've been out working the night shift. I've been out working all night long taking care of the sheep, and my locks are damp with the dew. He's a hard-working young man, and so he's wanting her to open to him and to give him a special kind of comfort that only she can give. But then let's notice in verse 3 her reaction to this, that in her reaction to his need for her. She says, "I have taken off my dress." So she's already in bed. "How can I put it on again? I've washed my feet." And of course, we don't really appreciate the significance of washing our feet like they did, because they wore sandals and their feet were dusty and dirty. And so washing their feet was just part of their nightly routine, like we brush our teeth. So she's saying, I have washed my teeth. Well, not washed my teeth. I've washed my feet. How can I dirty them again? So my feet are nice and clean. I'm already in bed. Why should I get up and get my feet dirty again just for you? I'm already here. I've come this far. I'm in Solomon's palace. I'm impressed with what I'm seeing. I really am not convinced that you're the one for me. Then in verse 4, in her dream, she says, "My beloved extended his hand through the opening, and my feelings were aroused for him." So in her dream, all she saw was his hand. And the minute she saw him, all these feelings of emotional involvement with him and attachment and love for him, they all came flooding back to her, and she was overwhelmed with him. She realized at this point that she was not going to be able to give up the love that she had for the shepherd for all of Solomon's wealth and power. So here it is, her feelings are aroused for him. And she says in verse 5, "I arose to open to my beloved." So she decided it was worth getting her feet dirty. And she got up to open to him, and my hands dripped with myrrh, and my fingers with liquid myrrh on the handles of the bolt. So here it is. She jumps out of bed. You can picture her splashing on perfume so that she'll smell nice for him. And she goes to open the door. And verse 6, "I opened to my beloved, but my beloved had turned away and had gone. My heart went out to him as he spoke. I searched for him, but I did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer me." So she opened the door, he was gone. And in her dream, she is realizing that once she makes the decision to stay with Solomon, she's going to be there with Solomon in the palace, and the shepherd is going to always be gone for her. He's not going to be there for her anymore. She can no longer go back to the shepherd if she should change her mind later on and decide that Solomon is not the one for her. Now, you remember in her earlier dream, she found the watchmen and she asked them where her beloved was, and they helped her find him. This time, the watchmen stop her. And let's see this in verse 7. It says, "The watchmen who make the rounds in the city found me. They struck me and wounded me. The guards of the wall took away my shawl from me." Now, earlier they helped her, but this time they didn't. They stopped her and they struck her, because it is inappropriate for a bride of Solomon to be out traipsing through the city at night looking for her beloved. Once she makes this commitment to Solomon, the beloved is going to always, is never going to be there for her again. And so the watchman stopping her is showing us the significance of her dream. That her dream, she realizes that if I want the shepherd, then I'm going to have to make up my mind, because once I'm married to Solomon, then the shepherd is never going to be mine again. Then what the Shulamite does is she's in bed, and we see her wake up from her dream, and the maidens come in, and she is going to talk to the maidens. And she's going to tell them, and this is really the turning point of our story. She's been wobbling back and forth, but this dream has caused her to make up her mind and to realize that she has got to have true love. So in Song of Solomon chapter 5, verse 8, the maidens come in, and she says, I adjure you, O daughters of Jerusalem, if you find my beloved, as to what you will tell him, for I am lovesick. Now, get the picture here. She's gone to bed. She's had this drink. She's woke up the next morning. Here are the maidens all coming in to take care of her and to get her ready for breakfast and get her ready to meet Solomon. And she tells them, go find my beloved. I'm lovesick. I want him. I don't want Solomon. I want this poor shepherd boy that I told you about when you first brought me to Solomon's tent. Now, these maidens are going to come back, and they're going to have a very obvious reaction in verse 9. The maidens say, what kind of beloved is your beloved, O most beautiful among women? What kind of beloved is your beloved? Thus you adjure us. Why are you asking us to pledge ourselves to go find the shepherd for you? What kind of a man would make you give up Solomon and all of his wealth and all of his luxuries? Now, these maidens have been living in Solomon's temple, or not in his temple, in his palace, and they've been seeing his luxuries. They know what it's like to be taken into Solomon's house and to become part of his harem. You know, when we think about the luxuries that Solomon had, you know, one thing that we take for granted is ice, chopped ice. Well, back during these days, they didn't have ice, except Solomon did. Solomon had so many slaves that when he wanted an ice-cold drink, all he had to do was to send a slave to run up to the top of a mountain, chop some ice or some snow, and run down the mountain before it melted, and he could have a nice ice-cold drink of whatever it is that he wanted. And so these maidens have been living around that kind of luxury. And here is a little country girl that's turning her nose up at all of that. She's no longer impressed. She wants to marry a poor shepherd boy, and they think she's crazy. Why, what kind of a girl would give up Solomon for a poor shepherd boy? So they ask the Shulamite, they say, what kind of beloved is your beloved that you would make us promise this? And the Shulamite is going to tell them what kind of beloved her beloved is. We see this in chapter 5, verses 10. She's going to say that my beloved is outstanding among 10,000. You can just line up 10,000 of the best men in Israel, and you could pick my beloved out in an instant. He is so outstanding. And then she is going to describe him from the top of his head to the tip of his toes to prove to them just exactly how outstanding he is. And I want to stop here for a little bit and let us talk a little bit about this quality of being outstanding. But first, let's notice what she says about him in verse 10. She says, my beloved is dazzling and ruddy, outstanding among 10,000. His hand, and some of your translations say head, and I think head is probably the more correct translation, because as we go through here from verses 11 down through 15, we're going to be all of the other sections describing from the top of his head to the tip of his toes. So I think it makes more sense for this to be talking about his head. So his head is like gold, pure gold. His locks are like clusters of dates and black as a raven. So as you think about this poetic description of him, he's got curly hair, and his hair is black, so he's got curly black hair. His eyes are like doves, so his eyes are peaceful when they look at you, beside streams of water bathed in milk and reposed in their setting. So what color is his eyes? His eyes are blue, aren't they? They're like streams of water. So he's got beautiful blue eyes. His cheeks are like a bed of balsam, banks of sweet-scented herbs. Lots of commentators think this bed of balsam is describing some type of a beard. So he's got a beard on his cheeks. And it's sweet-smelling again. His lips are lilies, dripping with liquid myrrh. So when you think about the shape of the lips, a lot of times they do look kind of like lily pads. So describing it in a very poetic and romantic way. His hands are rods of gold. And rods are a symbol of authority, so he's got strong, dependable hands. Set with beryl, and so you can kind of picture the fingernails as beryl sets there in these rods of gold. and his abdomen is carved ivory inlaid with sapphires. So she's describing his abdomen in a very beautiful way. You think of these bodybuilders, how they're very proud of their abdomens. Well, the shepherd's abdomen probably wasn't that muscular, but yet he was attractive to her. She liked the way he looked. His legs are pillars of alabaster. Alabaster is something that archaeologists, and they've gone back into a lot of these tombs of pharaohs and different kings and queens, they have found alabaster jars of perfume. And when they have opened up these alabaster jars of perfume, the fragrance inside them is such that these archaeologists believe that the perfumes have not lost any of their scent. Alabaster was something that was preserved very well, whatever was put into it. So perfumes that were put into alabaster jars and stored for thousands of years have retained their fragrance. So when she's saying his legs are pillars of alabaster, they are dependable, and they're something that she can depend upon. They're set on pedestals of pure gold. And so we see the pure gold again. His pedestals are his feet, just describing him from the top of his head down to his feet, pedestals of pure gold. And his appearance is like Lebanon, choice as the cedars. Now they had a special kind of cedar that didn't grow anywhere else except on Lebanon. And they considered the cedar that grew on Lebanon as the choicest, the best. And so when she says he is as choice as the cedars that grow on Lebanon, this is just another way of saying outstanding among 10,000. So she says, my beloved, yes, you go find him. Solomon can't even begin to compare to him because my beloved is outstanding among 10,000. No one can compare to him. Now you remember earlier in an earlier class we were reading over in Proverbs 31, verse 30, and we talked about the charm that every young girl should have. Well, this is the charm that the Shulamite has here, and we're going to spend some time talking about this because this is another one. We said we're going to talk about 3 different ingredients that every marriage must have to be successful. This is not only another one of those 3 ingredients, but this is what I think is the most important ingredient if a marriage is going to be successful, is to have this charm. So let's turn over to Proverbs 31, verse 30. And here in talking about the woman of great price, it says, up in verse 29, to get the context, it says, many daughters have done nobly. We've talked about in an earlier class how Proverbs 31 is talking about an older woman, and at this section of it, it is contrasting the older woman with young women. There are many young women who have done nobly, and nobly is the same form of the word excellent or virtuous up in verse 10, an excellent or a virtuous wife who can find. There are many young women who are doing nobly or virtuously. This simply means having the strength of an army, doing what you should be doing. There's many young women out doing what they should be doing at this stage in their life, but you excel them all. You as an older woman have mastered many of the problems of life that younger women are just now facing. You excel them all because you have arrived. Then it says, charm is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman who fears the Lord, she shall be praised. We talked about in an earlier class about how beauty is vain. It's not lasting. It's not something that we can depend upon. But then it says that charm is deceitful, and that's what we want to talk about for a little bit. A young man will not marry a young woman unless he's got some kind of ulterior motives, unless she has both this charm and this beauty to him. She has to be look pleasant to him. And this charm is really the number one characteristic. And this charm is what the Shulamite had, this attitude. He is outstanding among 10,000. Young men marry young women, or older men marry older women, whatever the case may be, women who think they are great. Women who think they are the most fantastic man that ever walked the face of this earth. And that is what the Shulamite thought at this time. And you only have to listen to somebody that's getting ready to get married to know that all young girls have this quality about the young man they're getting ready to marry. You listen to young girls talk, and they just go on about how wonderful he is, and he can do this, and he can do that, and he is just so wonderful. And as you listen to them, a lot of times it just makes you sick. This is the way they just go on and on and on about how wonderful he is. So young girls have this, and this is a quality that is optional in courtship. But we're going to see that it is something that God demands that we have later on in marriage. It is a command. Now, when you think about men and their egos, why do men like a woman that admires them? Men like a woman that admires them because they cannot go to another man for true admiration. When you get men around each other, how do they treat each other? They tease each other and they poke fun of each other. And all we have to do is listen to what goes on in our Bible classes and out here in the hall to know we see the preacher picking on different men and teasing them, and they tease him back. This is just the way men treat men. But when a woman begins to tease and to ridicule a man, then this is something that is going to turn a man off when it comes from a woman. A man wants appreciation from her and admiration from her that he is not going to get from a man. And the way charm is deceitful is that every man, when he marries a woman who thinks he is wonderful. A woman who thinks he is the most wonderful man that ever walked the face of this earth. But they get married, and she begins to find out what he does with his clothes when he pulls them off, and begins to find out about other little bad habits that he has. And she begins to nag, and she begins to complain. She begins to try to help him improve himself. And all of a sudden, this woman that he thought he had married, who thought he was so wonderful, no longer thinks he's so wonderful. She's got all kinds of complaints. And that is the way charm is deceitful. The word deceitful means to catch on a hook. It's just like a fish swimming in the lake who sees this big, nice, juicy worm. And he thinks, oh boy, I'm going to get that worm and it's going to really taste good. But once he gets the worm, he finds out that that worm is hiding a big, cold steel hook. And he's caught. He's trapped. And he doesn't have what he thought he was getting. And this is the way lots of men feel about their marriages. I married a woman that I thought was just really admired me, really thought I was great. And what's happened to it? This charm was deceitful. Instead of being what I expected it to be, I'm just trapped in a relationship with a woman who no longer thinks I'm the most wonderful man that ever walked the face of this earth. And then when you study Proverbs 31, you find that this older woman did not lose her charm. As she aged and as her husband aged, she kept her charm. And we see this up in verse 11. It says, the heart of her husband trusts in her, and he will have no lack of gain. She does him good and not evil all the days of her life. So her husband's heart trusts in her. She does him good. She's got this emotional involvement with him, this emotional attachment with him. She's still on his side. She's still got this charm that's going to make their life be what it should be. What I want us to do now is I want us to look at some New Testament passages that command this type of charm for us as wives. And in the New Testament word for this charm is the word reverence. And we find this word used in Ephesians 5, verse 33. In Ephesians 5:33, you know that chapter on Ephesians is talking about subjection and leadership. And then down in verse 33, he kind of comes down and he sums it all up. And he tells about the man's part and he tells about the woman's part. In Ephesians 5, verse 33, he says, nevertheless, let each individual among you also love his own wife, even as himself. And let the wife see to it that she respect her husband. Now, when he tells the husband to love his wife, even as his own self, God here through Paul is warning the man about an area of real danger to the man. And that is the man's selfishness. As he's the leader, not to get to thinking that he gets to do everything his way and that what he wants, well, then that's what he should be doing. Instead, he is to be looking out for his wife. He is to be treating her the way he wants to be treated. So this verse addresses the greatest danger for the man, the thing that he is going to abuse as he exercises his leadership. Now, if God is talking to the man about his great danger of abuse, it falls to reason that he's also talking to women about a great area of danger for them, an area of where women are likely to abuse their relationship with their husbands. And here it is, he says, and it is a command, let the wife see to it that she respect, or some of your older translations say, reverence her husband. And we're going to really look at what this word reverence and respect means, because this is, I think, the most important command God has given us as wives if we want to have a truly successful and wonderful marriage relationship. But this is striking at a woman's area of weakness, an area of danger that she has. And this has to do with the woman's attitude toward her husband. She marries him thinking that he's wonderful, and then because of her emotional nature, it is very easy for women over the years to become disillusioned and to allow that love to fall out of their hearts and out of their minds, and to lose this reverence and respect for their husbands. One preacher's wife was telling me about how that she and her husband did a lot of joint marriage counseling with both husbands and wives. And she said many times when husbands and wives would come to see them, that the man would just cry and bawl about how much he loved that woman and how much he would just do anything in this world to turn things around and to make things right with them. But she said the woman invariably sat there like a stone, that she was just so cold and so unemotional, that she had built such a wall around her emotions that she was beyond feeling. And when marriages get to that point, many times it is extremely hard to save a marriage once the woman has built a wall around her emotions. You know, we like to love. We are emotional individuals, and we like to love. We like to feel. We like to care. Those are feelings we enjoy. But when things don't work out the way we want and we get hurt, we don't like being hurt. So we build this wall around ourselves to protect ourselves. And when we build this wall around ourselves to protect ourselves, what happens is we make things worse. We make things worse for ourselves. We make things worse for our husbands because we can no longer feel. We can no longer love. We can no longer care or reverence our husbands like God wants us to. And that marriage is going to be doomed. As I have been teaching classes and noticing different marriages, I have observed that no matter what the marriage problem is, to the degree that a wife can reverence her husband, even if she is so bitter and angry at her husband that she can only do it a little teeny bit, to the degree that she can reverence her husband, her marriage will improve and it will get better. Now, if this is an older marriage where they've been married for a long time, generally when this type of reverence is withheld from a man, men become very bitter. And it takes a longer period of time for a woman to wear an older man down and to soften him up and to make him be responsive to that type of marriage. Now, the only marriages which do not respond fully to a woman reverencing her husband are marriages that I would call desperate marriages that we talked about earlier, where there's some type of sin in the husband's life. Yet even in those marriages, the reverence that the wife can have helps create an environment that if it's possible for him to respond, it helps create an environment in which it is more easy for him to respond, and it does help those marriages, even though they are not what they should be. Let's turn over to 1 Peter 3, and let's notice the second place where this word reverence is used. In 1 Peter 3, chapter 1, in verse 2, chapter 3, verses 1 and 2, it says, "In the same way, you wives, be submissive to your own husbands, so that even if any of them are disobedient to the word, they may be won without a word by the behavior of their wives." So he's talking about wives living with men who are disobedient to God's word. They have heard God's word and they have rejected it. These are men who are not Christians. The behavior that can win these men is in verse 2. It says, "As they observe your chaste and respectful behavior." This word respectful is our word reverence. God wants us to have reverence for our husbands, even if our husband is not a Christian, even if he is not acting like he should, even if he has heard God's word and rejected it. God wants us to have reverence for him, because if anything can win him, then this is what may win him. God doesn't give us a guarantee in these marriages, but this is the thing that can get his attention. So what I want us to do is I want us to look at reverence and notice what all is involved in reverence. And your homework is going to be, and you don't have to write this down at this point, is to read. In Volume 2, I have one whole chapter devoted to learning what reverence is about. So this is going to be in that chapter. If you don't get all of these notes down, well then don't worry about it, because these definitions are in that chapter and you're going to be reading it. Mainly just be paying attention and thinking about what reverence is so that you can understand it. Basically, reverence is having a wholesome dread of displeasing Him, displeasing our husband, or sometimes we're commanded to reverence God, having a wholesome dread of displeasing God. What I have done, these words in red come from the Amplified New Testament. And in case you don't know what an Amplified New Testament is, it says that the Greek words are so colorful and carry so much meaning in them that it is very hard to find one English word a lot of times to translate one Greek word with, or one Hebrew word. So what the Amplified New Testament does, it gives all of the English words that have the same or nearly the same meaning. So all of these words in red are words that the Amplified New Testament says means the same or nearly the same as reverence. All of these blue words are Webster's definitions of the Amplified words, just breaking the word down even more so we can really dissect reverence and really understand what's involved in it, because reverence is really the most important thing we as wives have to do if we want to have a successful marriage. The first thing about reverence is that reverence notices Him, observe and pay attention to Him. This means, if you ever tried to talk to someone while they were watching a television show, you know how frustrating that is. You talk to someone and their kids are coming in and interrupting, and they're trying to talk to their kid and you at the same time. Well, if we really reverence our husband, then we quit watching our favorite television show to listen to him when he wants to talk to us. We quit doing other things, and we observe him and we pay attention to him. We give him our undivided attention. Reverence means that we regard him. We take him into consideration. We heed him. We keep him in view. My husband's just about been out of town for 10 days. A lot of times when I hear women talk about all the time. Well, what he doesn't know won't hurt him. Meaning, my husband's out of town, I can go do what I want to do. Or he's at work, I can do what I want to do. If we reverence our husband, even though he may be out of town or he may be at work, we still take him into consideration. What it is he wants us to do, then we heed him, we keep him in view, and we go ahead and we have this wholesome dread of displeasing him, even though he's not there to see what we're doing, even though he may never know what we did to please him. We regard him in this way. We honor him. We recognize his title to respect and esteem. You know, all men have this title to respect and esteem simply because they are men, because they are created in the image of God in the realm of authority. One easy way to recognize a man's title to respect and esteem is to address him ever so often as sir. Please, sir, or thank you, kind sir. And saying these things in a respectful way. Just recognizing his title to respect because he is a man. Then if we reverence him, that means we prefer him. We set him above everyone else in estimation, favor, or liking. That means if we have to make a decision between something that our parents want and he wants, then we don't have to decide about it. He automatically wins. If we have to make a decision between what the children want and what he wants, then we set him above the children. We know that he's the one that we prefer, and we esteem him in this way. Okay, as we continue to break down reverence, then we want to notice some other qualities of reverence. And that is, if we reverence him, then we venerate him. We regard him with admiration and deference. We have this admiration for him. You know, when people are going together, we talk about how blind love is. This young couple's going together and talk about their love for each other is blind. They're not seeing each other's faults. Well, we as women need to work to keep our love blind for our husbands, to continue to have this admiration, to look within them and see things to admire and appreciate that other people do not take the time to see. We esteem him, and that means we appreciate the worth of him. We appreciate things about him that other people don't know him well enough perhaps to appreciate. We appreciate the genuine part of him that only perhaps we as his wives know. Then we defer to him. That means we put him before other things, postpone other things for him. Now, earlier we put him before other people. This is putting him before other things, putting him before our job, before things that we do around the home, postponing other things for him. I'll give you one example of this. There was a lady, and we lived in Amarillo, who had a bunch of people invited over for Saturday evening for dinner. And so while she was busy getting ready for dinner, and I don't know how it is in your house when you have a whole bunch of people coming, but I know at my house I've always got a list longer of things to do than I'm going to have time to do. So she was rushing around getting things ready for this company that was coming that evening. Her husband comes along and he says, "Honey, how about going for a bike ride with me?" Now, this is not me. This is another biking couple. So anyway, her husband came along and says, "How about going for a bike ride with me?" And so she said immediately, it went through her head all this long list of things that she needed to do. And then she said she very quickly mentally thought, well, I don't have to do this and I don't have to do that. And so she told her husband, "Sure, I'll go with you." So she just left everything, got on the back of the bike and went for a ride with him, came home. And while she was on the back of this bike, she was not worrying and stewing about all the jobs that she had left undone at home. She had just mentally checked them off that I'm not going to be able to do all of these things and had accepted that. Went out for this ride, came back. Her husband was relaxed in a good, happy mood. She was relaxed in a good, happy mood. Had their company come over. The company didn't know what she hadn't got done and had a good evening. And so this is one way that we defer to our husband, put him above other things, postpone other things for him. Then if we reverence him, that means we praise him, express approval, commend him. Reverence does not do one bit of good as long as it's in our head. Reverence has to be expressed to be effective. So we have to express this approval. We have to verbally commend him and let him know what it is that we like about what he is doing. And then reverence loves him. And this is a strong personal attachment induced by sympathetic understanding, strong liking, fondness. Again, this is something that appeals to our feminine emotional nature, having this strong personal attachment induced by sympathetic understanding. We understand his problems. We understand where he's coming from. We really like him, and we have a tremendous fondness for him. And so this is something that is important for us to do if we're going to truly reverence our husband. Okay, I'm going to stop right there.